We are on part 2 of our discussion on competing secular theories of justice. And so let's go back to Tim Keller's essay. Here we go. And we're going to cover and go over in this video the liberal theory of social justice, secular theory of justice. So here we go. Biblical critique of secular justice and critical theory by Timothy Keller. Let's go down to the portion that talks about the liberal viewpoint. Okay, so here we go. Here is the spectrum of justice theories, and he puts liberal kind of on the moderate individualistic side, right? And as I told you in the first video, what we have essentially done is moved from a lot more people believing in the liberal view, whose core value is a focus on fairness, to in our time today, where our society is now really controverted because the leaders of our society and a lot of institutions are demanding an allegiance to a postmodern view, which is really about power. So let's go down to the liberal view. The Bible balances individual freedom with community obligations. Absolutely right. And let's just go now talk about the secular view, what he calls the liberal view. And I think this is a good summary, all right? A just society promotes fairness for all. Fairness, that's the key, right? This view, more recently argued by John Rawls. John Rawls is he's a highly important and influential social theory and political theorist. And he spent decades as a professor at Harvard, okay? And he wrote an important book called A Theory of Justice, which is highly influential in the academy. And now, whether you've ever read John Rawls or not, it's a lot. John Rawls is basically is the operating assumptions in a lot of our cultures, well, until more recently, okay? So this view, more recently argued by John Rawls, greatly expands the idea of human rights into what libertarians would call entitlements. And what that means is, if you are within our community, if you're in our nation, you fall into certain categories, you're entitled to have certain rights, okay? Liberals add to freedom rights to speech, property, and religion, which all the libertarians believe, and these are explicitly written in the Constitution, right? These are the freedom rights in the Constitution. Liberals add to the freedom rights of speech, property, and religion. They also add these, also social or economic rights. And this is where we get this idea of social justice, right? Or economic, in other words, rights to things like an education or to medical care. For instance, that's not in the Constitution at all. Like, there should be a free education, public education for everybody. That's not in the Constitution. There should be a right that everybody should have, basic medical care, or even more than basic medical. That's not in the Constitution. But people who have this fairness view, this liberal view of justice, have tended to believe this and argue for this, and have pushed for it in society. So John Rawls' justification for such rights goes like this. He argued that if people had to devise a society from behind a veil of ignorance, in other words, not knowing where they would be placed, not knowing what race, gender, and social status, etc., they would be. In other words, before you're ever born, you don't even know if you're going to be white or black or male or female, or if you're going to be upper class, lower. So then what we should try to do is form a purely fair society for everybody, so that regardless of where you are in your social location, that it would be fair for you. That was the idea, right? That everyone would, out of pure rational self-interest, what they care about, what they want, design a system of justice, a society in which there were significant legal measures to redistribute wealth to those who were born in poor communities, and to establish many other economic and social rights. Okay, so this explicitly advantages those who are disadvantaged through legal and political means. Okay, only that kind of society would be fair and rational. Once it is established that economic and social rights are valid, then in the liberal view, there is no need in society for any consensus on moral values. So we don't have to, deal with religion and all this other kind of stuff, because we've attained real fairness. No need to all agree on what the good is. Rather, honoring individual human rights becomes the only necessary moral standard, and denying them, the only sin, right? Then people will be free to live their lives pursuing whatever they believe is their good. Highly individualistic, can't you see? Right? Freedom. I'm free, but we're going to be free inside of a fair society. That's how we'll be just. So, a major difference from the libertarian view is that now it is just and fair for the state, the government, to redistribute wealth through taxation and government control of the market. The state to redistribute wealth through taxation and the government to control of the market. I told you in my first video that those people who are more on the political left, they tend to be more Democrats, they like this more social theory of justice, and they called it social justice. And people who tended to be more pro-business and pro-free market tended to dislike this view. They tended to have more of a libertarian view of social justice. And then they said justice, like you can see it's enumerated right there in the Constitution. And then those people who wanted this more expansive view of the government, of the state, redistribute wealth. Well, that means tax people and then use that money to give it to those people who are poor. Those people who are richer should have to give more money to the government. And then there'll be wiser, good people who are in control who can then redistribute it to make everything more fair, even to those who are more disadvantaged and poor, right? Nevertheless, right here, Rawls and liberals still believe that some kind of free market was the best way to grow the wealth of a society that then can be just shared justice. So this is not a communist view. This isn't like a full-on socialistic view where like the government was going to take everything. And so you can kind of call it soft socialistic or more of a tempered capitalistic. All right. So it's still believed in using the free market, but the government would have a lot more power and handle a lot more money to try to make life fair, right? The reason that liberals are basically still friendly to capitalism is that ultimately this view is still highly individualistic, giving individuals freedom to create their own good, not about good from God, right? And meaning and morality. So liberalism still aims not for equal outcomes, but equal opportunity for individuals to achieve their happiness. Let me just go. It doesn't aim for equal outcomes, but equal opportunity for individuals, right? For individuals to achieve their own happiness. So this is still a individual freedom-oriented view of a just society. And this is really, really important because this really contrasts with the demands of justice from the postmodern, more neo-Marxist viewpoint that's happening today. The aim was was not for equal outcomes, but for equal opportunity. So this was like this. So if you were born, say, like in a poor family, or maybe you didn't have a father, that's not your fault that you didn't have a father, like you were born and then you didn't have a father, you had a single mother, it was much more difficult. But you can't just say, well, this, whoever was born, let's say if you were born from a single father, or let's say if you were born Black, or let's say if you were born, Hispanic, or let's say you were born in a poor neighborhood as opposed to a rich neighborhood, when you grow up to become an adult, should you have an equal outcome, an equal result to more privileged and people in the society? So like today, there's this greater demand that justice means the outcomes have to be evened out. So that if you see a disparity, like Black people tend to have less money or less power or get less promoted into places than say white people, then that's unjust. Just there's disparity of results, injustice. That's the way the thinking is today, because it's about, the fixation is on equality of outcomes, right? Equal outcomes. This is how today's more postmodern view is really, really geared. But actually, in the more liberal view, it was really about equal opportunity. And so, just to give you when I was growing up and we first moved to the United States, I remember going to school. I didn't have any pencil, books, nothing. My parents just sent me to school, all right? And I get to school, and you know what? They gave the books, they gave you the paper, the pencil, all of it. And we lived in a poor working class community. And my class, I'm thinking, let's say fifth grade. In fifth grade, my class was probably majority white. Very few Asians. I think I was certainly the only Korean. I don't remember anybody. I think we had a couple of Vietnamese kids, a number of Hispanic kids, right, and a few black children in my class. And I didn't know who was richer or who was poor. We were probably all generally on the lower income side because we're living in a poor neighborhood, and everything was offered to us by the school. And who paid for it? I used to just think this was just totally free, but it wasn't free. It's paid for through taxes. And but the idea was we're all giving an equal opportunity to work hard and then to go out and succeed and make your dreams come true, get the American dream. So when I was growing up, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, most everybody believed in this. I mean, certainly Christians believed in this. Christians believed that what would be really just is that poor people should have an equal opportunity to get a chance to make it in society, regardless of whether they were a black, white, poor, rich, you name it, as opposed to people who were more privileged and who had more, who were white. And everybody I knew thought this. Non-Christians thought this. Christians thought this, and this was how things would be fair, equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And so this was the dominant view. There are a series of problems and that where Tim Keller talks about this thing. He gives you this quick little biblical analysis. So as much recent scholarship has demonstrated, liberalism's beliefs in human rights and care for the poor are grounded in Christianity. So I know it's a secular viewpoint, but actually these values about caring for the poor and they should have a fair shake of equal opportunity actually comes from Christianity. It's kind of smuggled in. The scholars argue these beliefs depend on a view of the individuals having infinite dignity and worth, and of individuals as being equal regardless of race, gender, and class. And so where's equality? Certainly we're not equal in terms of power or money, or of status in society. The equality is the equality of worth under God. It's a Christian doctrine. It's a biblical viewpoint. This belief only arose in cultures influenced by the Bible and marked by belief in a creator God. They also show that these Judeo-Christian beliefs, that's the older view, Judeo-Christian, Western civilization, it's based upon this view. And so this viewpoint really is old and deep. It's not just an American viewpoint. You get back to, like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, this would have been a Judeo, and Christians and Jews, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, they tended, not always, but they tended to agree on this kind of thinking about justice, and it tended to match more along with the Bible. So they also show these do not fit with the modern secular view that there are no moral absolutes and that humanity is strictly the product of evolution. So there's a problem here in terms of how their values fit. The conclusion is that these older beliefs in human dignity are essentially smuggled into secular modern culture. So there's this kind of hypocritical and incompatible incoherence. The moral values and justice actually came from Christian values, but the worldview that we're just products of naturalistic evolution, that secular viewpoint. This is the way where we're going. But nonetheless, it's very strange. You have all these secular, agnostic, even atheist people who very strongly believe in this liberal view of social justice, of justice. And so just in contrast, for instance, like in a recent sermon, I quoted to you out of this brilliant book called Dominion by Tom Holland, and he shows you, he's an expert on ancient Greco-Roman history, and he just shows you that Greeks and Romans just thought, what do you mean equality? Because it's like, we could kill them. It's like, well, they're this skin color. They're not Greeks. We can just kill them. Well, them, we could just use them for sex and then we could sell them. So, because there's no God, there's no transcendent morality that makes us like we have to conform to this thing. And so they didn't believe in this kind of justice. They would have laughed at this kind of stuff. But today's, like agnostic, atheist, secular people, for the most part, especially throughout much of my adult life, believed in this liberal social justice theory. And much of it actually, very ironically, had kind of biblical Christian kind of moral presuppositions, right? So, this means that Christians can agree with much in this justice theory. Nevertheless, as McIntyre showed, there are contradictions and fatal flaws in liberalism's approach. So I want to just say a couple more things. He gives you a few more, well, he gives you a few like critiques of this thing. The individual is the de facto absolute standard that, vetoes the other value. That's true. A lot of secular liberals who operated inside of this liberal theory, that's how they do, that if justice is just honoring individual rights, there are no higher moral absolutes. Yeah, like going to church or like worshiping God or like having to obey certain more radical commands from God because it's from the Bible. I mean, like, no, that's not that important, right? Or that secular critics might rationalize an insufficient basis. That's totally true, right? And here's one that I think is really important, this particular critique. Liberals' insistence that religious views stay out of the public discourse is hypocritical. It tells religious people that they must not argue from their faith beliefs, but only use public reason and rational self-interest, all the while smuggling in their own beliefs. In other words, they essentially secular religious beliefs on human nature, rights, sexuality, and many other things that are faith assumptions left over from the Christian past and not on the deliverances of science. Okay, so that's a really powerful critique. And all throughout, especially like, I remember when I was in my master's work at Harvard in the 90s, some people, even Christians, would argue if we're going to go out into the public, you can't, say anything about what Christians believe or what the Bible says. You just have to just only use secular premises and only argue from secular reason, public reason, and rational self-interest. But I want to go back to this point here before I close out this kind of introduction to the liberal social view, which is that this liberal view, even with all its flaws, that Christians can agree with much in this justice theory. They really can, and really can agree and did agree. A lot of the values are actually, strangely, even though they're propounded and offered as a secular social justice viewpoint, social justice really, it's very compatible with the Bible and probably pretty much taken from biblical values. And so what you would have is like like Protestant evangelicals basically agree with social justice. When I was in the 80s and 90s, you had a lot of Catholics agree with social justice, a lot of Jews, again, who got this viewpoint from the Bible. So you would have secular people who are maybe even atheists or agnostic. You would have Jews, you'd have Catholics, you'd have evangelicals. They all would agree on social justice because social justice was of this liberal sort, and it was much more compatible with Christianity. But here's the way I want to close this particular teaching. If you are a Christian today and you like this viewpoint of social justice theory and you think social justice, this is what it means, you have to be really, really careful today. Because today, now what is being demanded of justice, social justice, it doesn't mean this anymore. In fact, what is being demanded by the new social justice, the more postmodern, the most postmodern definition of it, what I would say is a neo-Marxist definition of it, is very different. It's like the word is the same. The word is the same, justice, social justice. But if you go look up in their dictionary, the definitions and meaning has fundamentally changed. And the definition and meaning is no longer this liberal social justice theory, which is more compatible with Christianity. Now, today's social justice theory, the postmodern kind, is deeply, deeply in conflicting with biblical Christianity. So that's what you need to understand. So today, if you want to say, hey, the Bible should just stand for justice, and you think, we should just go out there and agree with what our culture is demanding of justice today, you really need to think twice. That there's different social theories of justice, and this older theory is no longer the going viewpoint now. And if you just think that Christians should just go out there and agree with justice, the Bible says justice. There is a postmodern view of justice and there's a liberal view of justice. And we need to be very, very careful what we can say that Christians can now agree with and can't agree with. And so please really careful with that. We've moved from liberal to postmodern in our culture, and you should understand that. In the next video, we'll tackle postmodern.